what are your core self-care practices?
Mm, really good question. This is something that I have been in a waxing and waning relationship with. Like, we were talking about this earlier, but self care can look different at different times. But I notice I always have to come back to similar practices. And for me, it is a morning routine, something that's grounding me, especially once I started traveling more frequently and moving around. So, some form of movement in the morning. Typically, it's yoga. I am a yoga practitioner as well. But even if it's bike riding or something like that, some movement, some form of reflection and quiet time. Oftentimes, that's meditation in the mornings. But sometimes it is the yoga practice. And, especially when the pandemic began, I was having a really difficult time sitting in silence.
Mm.
And actually, that's when my yoga practice took off because I had to find other ways to find that stillness because it
Mhm.
wasn't coming from here. So, some sort of stillness in the mornings. And the way that I eat is a big part of my core self care practices for a few reasons. One, I feel better when I'm eating in ways that are aligned with what feels good for me.
Mhm.
So for me, that's like dairy free. My body doesn't love dairy. Eating less meat and watching the things that I have some food sensitivities around. And so not only is it about how my body physically feels, but also mentally, if I'm not eating in ways that are supportive of myself, I'm more brain foggy. I have less
Mm.
motivation to do the things that I enjoy doing. I have less clarity, less connection to the spirit, which is something that I lean on for my work. And so I've really always had to come back to those things as like my core practices. And then being out in nature regularly is really as well.
Mm.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. And as a wellness practitioner, I think I have the privilege of having, years of experience and degrees that are centered on, like I have these years of practice that I can always fall back on and say, okay, something's out of whack. Let's get that. But I understand that's not everybody's life. But I think it's important to note that even someone who is consumed in the wellness world, some weeks I'm not aligned with my wellness practices like I should be, and I'm noticing the difference. And some weeks are harder than other weeks. And
Mhm.
sometimes and I think that's such a valid part of this because sometimes we're so hard on ourselves and try to make ourselves feel guilty that like every day discipline says I need to, but I really had to start reframing discipline as something that is aligned with what you know is best for you in that moment or at that time, and not this rigid.
Yes. Which I think of that rigid kind of discipline as very Western
Yeah.
thinking, like very medical model kind of
Yeah.
discipline that doesn't see the mind, body, and spirit as one. You know what I mean? It's like forget about your body. Let's get this done. Like
Yeah.
I lived like that for
Yeah.
years.
Yeah.
I didn't even start trying to take care of my body till I was 48, Meckell. So I'm
Yeah.
so glad that you have adopted healthier practices younger
Yeah.
because it just wasn't even a thing that I was taught to consider. My mother was an immigrant from the Philippines, um, and she worked in this very typical immigrant kind of way, just 6 days a week, 12-hour days, and even at home. Like she was never still unless she was asleep. And she didn't sleep that much.
Yeah.
She was the first one up in the morning, making breakfast. Our clothes were always perfect. Our homework was always checked. She was like type A and everything, right? And a Capricorn. So I
Yeah.
I was hardcore like type A, and I had my own spin on it,
Yeah.
because I really um always had a really strong spiritual life too, and was, basically born to be a mom, uh,
Mm.
and raised 16 kids in San
Yeah.
Francisco. So I just had to make sure there was always enough room for them
Yeah.
and the people I served in the community. Uh, but I didn't care for myself at all until
Mhm.
48.
Mm.
And I'm still working on it. I'm
Mhm.
56 now, and I'm just now getting to the point where I feel like self-care is not negotiable anymore. This
Mm.
is a necessary part of my life.
Mhm.
And I realize, I'm a fully mature adult, and I realize that I still have to exist in the system that
Mm.
we live in, and I have bills and rent and things like that. Um, but I just refuse to make money in ways that don't allow me to take care of myself.
Yeah, that part.
But it took me so long to get to this point. It was quite the journey.
Yeah, but you got there, and I think that's the part that's inspiring is that you found your way there even at 48, you know?
Mhm.
And I feel like a lot of people can resonate with that because sometimes we feel like we get into these patterns or we've learned certain patterns
Mhm.
and don't often see different realities. And once you start believing that there's a different reality, and once you start, yeah,
Then
it's.
that's when you have a choice,
Mhm.
right? Because until you know that there are other options,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
really don't have a choice.
yeah.
And then I think a lot of people fear is a huge factor
Hmm.
in their self-care because, well, for so many reasons, but just on the purely practical level, I feel like a lot of people are still afraid to walk away from bad work situations.
Hmm.
um they just feel like they can't afford to walk away. um but that's changing. Have
It's
you noticed the great
changing.
resignation?
Yes. Yes, tomorrow's supposed to be a general labor strike.
That's
I haven't been
right.
hearing much about it in the past month or two, but people are having those conversations, and I believe, as someone who I love TikTok, it's one of my favorite platforms, and I love just learning from Gen Z and just seeing how younger folks are navigating. But access to those types of conversations and hearing the way people are thinking about work and seeing people resigning and putting it on TikTok. I believe that's one of the reasons that people, they were trying to get rid of the app for a while because it is really powerful when
Too revolutionary.
it spread really quickly on there. And when you see someone, at their place of employment and everybody's walking out like that, starts revving up the engines for people to understand that
Oh, yeah.
maybe they also have some space to push back or ask for more money or, you know, just set some boundaries at work.